아래당도 땡이 또 내점적 건주스문이야 접수하게 디 거시고와 되는 자당도 어그세 바바 제네시 제베야다 네 군도 상보 전주선보 군도 상보 기능 건조 전주선보 군도 상보다 네 제베야 바바 제네시리아 접수주의 겸로 디 거시로와 자 그래서는 내 구소 투기 연대인 주비 토네 안델이야 안지게 베네 바바 제네시스야디 뒤다 남바군도 셰셈전 탐제 야 아니 동아단 자두기 인지 니왕게 제 르마 예수님 저바 마토와 셴리야 아니 람데 코와다 달바다 탐지 김보고 바토베셔 람데 바 뒤다 남바군도 아니 두스지그 오레스 제가 니네자 당한주기 안지게 안주에나 직대내게 디바 먹고 사요를 대사 당한주기 디바 삼마세 아니 야와다 나솔라 내되게 동아 녀되게 냠다고 심전되게 아니 코베 동아래 녀도 겹도 소신에 그심 도시는 야 잡수 줘야 돼 디고 쉬루하다.
Good evening. So last week we continued in the chapter on confession to look at the opponent power, to look at the power of basis or the power of reliance in terms of the four opponent powers. And in the particular verses that we looked at, we turned for refuge explicitly to three of the 8 great bodhisattvas, namely Samantabhadra, Manjughosha, and Chenrezig. Turning to them, requesting that through their unmistaken compassionate action, that they illuminate the complete and unmistaken path to us, so that we cultivate that within ourselves in order to purify the vast number of past and non-virtuous imprints on our continuum. So we confess those and we turn to them for their ongoing guidance so that we can purify past misdeeds so as not to have to experience the suffering of the lower realms in future rebirths. We'll continue where we completed last week with the 51st verse. And here we turn to two further of the 8 close bodhisattvas, to the Aryas Akshagarbha, pure Shantideva, and all compassionate protectors. From my heart I cry out, seeking, protecting refuge.
다다니 시린델이야 잠바단 집어남 세티기 놈도 요래 안 다다네 제솔야 다장주sem바 남게 님보다 세인님보다 저주sem바 잠바단 집어남 세티기 아니야 대솔야 아니 가려서는 투시 최고인 탐제라서 투시 최고서 투시 첨보신 심제 탐제야 동아 잠바단 제와 동아다 자되게 삼바 어두신 투시 첨보다 대바 인지 첨보다 대바 안디기 다시 심지어 담주 동화단 자야다 디기 주비게 돈달이야네 지금 제 셴레 펜버 주비 개와지 개와스 자와디 개와 되니까 몰람제비 또 첨보다 템바레스 또 첨보다 템바유 레센 다되니기 투시 안데자 결혼서 셴 심지어 담주 코에 동화를 줘야지 탈바다 탐지기 먹고 보나 치바지 그 구현레스 지나되니기 투제 최고야 탐제라서 결혼서 탐제 안 되는 시에서 그런 쪽이다 당보 체인디게 되는 연대디게 봐주시는 삼다의 식으로 니디로와 아니 숨바네 안 숨바데 제스 바바 남기 니보 세니보다 투제 최고 탐제라서 숨제.
The verse starts with explicitly to the Aryas Akshagarbha and pure Kishingarbha, but it's a plural, so it includes some of the other of the 8 close bodhisattvas, such as Maitreya, that haven't been thus far explicitly mentioned. And here, ourselves, as the practitioner being referenced, we turn to them, that we're recognizing that in the third line, all compassionate protectors, turning to them, knowing that it's through their compassion they strive to protect beings from suffering. And they do so through a variety of activities such as the power of prayer and so forth, but in particular, they are called protectors in that they guide beings in the cultivation of the Dharma within their own minds. And it's the cultivation of the Dharma within one's own mind that is what protects one from suffering. So with this entire understanding, one turns to the Bodhisattvas such as Akshagarbha, Kishagarbha, and so forth, requesting their ongoing guidance and assistance.
Tene gyabtsul nini wede peyos ne gyabtsul se da nganzu zhuwa rangda shen kowa le ne de ken semjan tamje da kowa le zhuwi ki gyabye de sui gyukurdu se nganzu kowa de le targo do targo baza de le gyobe nyoba de su yorasin beke ba gyabtsul se nganzu du shen su yoras ba da je 심주 초와 se ne zewa se ruwa da so ha고 tene jeba cheondu ani kyoranzu le yoba de tongdu se gorda gyabtsul se de 지상 결혼을 여바디 델레 교배 뉴바디 결혼을 두스 데네자 아니게 데네게 결혼을 땐데 교브로치 교구리 선배기다 이체베게 닝지 닝네 외대배승이 셈 딩네 안 결혼을 접수 두고 외대배승은 아니 바 천죄제ben 파반남이 님보다 세인님보다 아니지 데네게 아니 인지바남세다 잠발라 소파 신바 천배제 아니가 먼저 코를 동안에 봐 교로체 해야지 겹수주의 생닝다반에 겹수주의 인생은 온도시네 겹 외대배세 디스모로 겹수인의 외대배세.
The final line then. On behalf of myself and all other ordinary suffering beings, all of us who yearn to be freed from every single suffering found in the realms of samsara, we seek out those who have the capacity to offer real lasting protection. And those who, having sought out those who can provide protection, we've come to recognize these great Arya Bodhisattvas, such as Akashagarbha, Shantideva. It gets more difficult for me here. Saravana, and Sadhana, the Tibetans are a lot easier. There we go, thank you. And Maitreya, the last one I can do. So we turn to all these great bodhisattvas that we have, through seeking who is a protecting refuge, we turn to them and cry out from our heart for their ongoing guidance so that we develop protection from suffering within.
And the name, that's another Liya, those gifts to us. And then Geshe Thubten Rabten Ponyaloso Dangwanam Zhane Choshir Jerjeba Dorje la Gyapsu.
Then we continue with another of the 8 great bodhisattvas. I go to Vajrapani, so the 52nd verse, I go to Vajrapani for protecting refuge, whose mere sight causes hateful beings, as well as the messengers of the Lord of Death, to flee, terrified in the 4 directions.
다 Geshe Thubten 시대 Geshe Thubten 시대 즉 Geshe Thubten 시대 Geshe 안에 자나들 제시 통바이 나서한테 제와이 나서다 통용도는 시고다 신지 통의 신지이 폰야라서 당와남 자네 초시를 제제 봐서 다 신지 폰야라서 봐 남시대장은 주기 뜻마 지기 시행한 소단 베냐와르마 개외나 되네기 이반에 냐송과 가소랭한 줄이야 직강할 때hen 두부 당한지 요래서지 되네기 미수 지 여버로 수고 넘버로 된지 아니 넘버 된지 시고다 신지 번야라서 당와 남세대 야 뇌신 체화 제백에 체화 제행기 아니 냐와랴 되네기 아주 냐송과 되네기 아니 여바당 되네 대소 냐송과데 예세오라 자네 시도다 통내에서 수통나서 자네 초시 제제 바세도 지상 Chana Dorje Pa Tongyo Pe Shen Hud Chasang Choshal Dredugo and Choshir Jerjeba Jerwas and Jebalagore, Dredugo Relare, Chone Jerjebas. Donala Karet Dingores and Papa Pene Chana Dorjelia, then Nubi topped in the Jores or the Nuba, Krasna one Nuberos, Penacariores and Chesna Shinji Penanga ko nyawa da denige yeje denige mazole kala tanga da nyushin tsawar chebeke deji an chinese ka papa chana de sodo be shera zane shera chun ba gazgal pa choji gazgal drendu gore sele zane shen drendu gore sele 아 chana de denje ko chana de den nubo yore so denige ben nga di ro de jike sengeru shena so namda drendu gore wa ni na shi Korea Wangta Nubasin Yoba, the Jurgora, Simcha Shandadige. On Dinashi, the new Chana Doji, Tono Dune, Gashi, Tony, Chana Doji, the Paton Dune, and Karji Horsen, Shinji Ponyaki, the Niki, Yesoma, the Shasan, Jurgora.
So looking at first in English, the second, third, and fourth lines together. So, whose mere sight? This refers to, of course, to Vajrapani. So, merely seeing Vajrapani has a remarkable effect on all harmful beings, whose mere sight causes hateful beings as well as the messages of the Lord of Death. So, we can relate to hateful beings as well as the messengers of the Lord of Death. In this particular verse, we can relate to them as being the appearances that arise to someone who is dying and is in danger or is heading towards the lower realms. So as they are dying, fearful appearances, terrifying appearances manifest before them, and this is what's being referred to as the messengers of the Lord of Death or hateful beings. And so such appearances that may arise to one's mind as one is passing from this life into the next, Vajrapani has the power or the capacity to cause them to flee terrified in the four directions.
Nyawada, Soda, Denigi, Jeva, and then Sosuliagic, Sosuke, Nawalia, and Sosulia, and Chike, Neva chicken, Sewa chicken, and Shanato was Mido, the same gender with the Shanato, the Negi, Sosuke, Nang, and Delia, Digi Sosulia, Ganga, Tiguba, now the Sosulia doing about me when you are Jungorova. She's not Denigi, Yodu, and Delia, and Anjuki, Chike. Chana Dorje, Chana Dorje Pa, Chiki, Lol Jamba, the Deniki, Lam Deniki Jamba ina, Deniki Nubi Topi, Deniki, Namati Nutroyada, Deni Yungore Sada, and Gene Shada, Deni Jishinji Ponya said, Deniki, member Jianchi, my Shia Denga Leda, Nyomombe Ongi, and Dushine, Dipase, Dipetiki Yungor, Wakanaji or Wansole. Deneza, Chana Dorje. Jeva Chana Dorje Deva Chana Jula Capsuto, Kemlu Jeva Yina, Chesna Digi, Nubi Topi, Mansola Kawa, Sakawa di Topi, Manso Denigi, and the Kowa Mansola Kiegi, Dibetia, Taru, Saji, Dona Dinesco War Takaja, Nanzuke. Ah. Nyewale Kine, Mane, Nyewa Dunga Yonga Jorvada, Cross and Nawala Karayong, Takashili, socially same gender, or the middle, Lawa Son over the Shana, so the Cross of Ganga Jeva Tongor, Wada, Nangorwa, just a Denigi, Nane, that Shinji Ponya said this one. Just a Denigi, and then Chana Dorje. And Jamba and Devala Soba Kitu and Digi now at the Nuya Tayada, now Nuwa that didn't go as.
Here one turns to Vajrapani with the understanding that even if one is born in the hell realms, where one is tormented and tortured by hateful beings, by these messengers of the Lord of Death, they are appearances to our mind that are inflicting this pain on us. And these appearances arise through the power of our negative karma and afflictions. So that we are tormented. Beings who are tormented in the hell realms are being tormented by these appearances that have arisen due to, and these appearances are these messengers of the Lord of Death that have arisen due to the power of our negative karma and afflictions. But by calling Vajrapani to mind, he has the power to help us gain freedom from such a rebirth, or liberation from such a rebirth. And this is because by calling him to mind, the virtuous act of turning to him for protection, this will serve to purify our negative karma and afflictions.
Charlia and Dorje Zindu, what is a denegate Dorje Zindu and Chana Dorjelia, and then Tawan Japsugi in Sashisumura.
The final line in the Tibetan, our first line, I go to Vajrapani for protecting refuge. And the synonym for Vajrapani that's used here in the Tibetan is Vajra holder. So in some of the other translations, Genla was now just saying Vajra holder means Vajrapani.
Di dona la di andang zugi japsu ko diva shabat sam ma shu sarawada. Chisa dona la ju san yi konjo che, chue konjo che, gidung konjo chen ju semba papa. Da ni chen ju semba papa che dina de da chen ju sembe papa na chen ju semba nyewe se yi de pa chen me ji re ne chen me ji du chen japsu zhuo ta di ma ji ju ruwa. Dona la ju karas ne 도 가르삼 당고레선 되네 삼당고레지 월다 아저 안에 다대가 줄이야 체델이야 아줄가 가른 냠뇨 요르선에 소소리야 강아체야 동아뇨야다 동아뇽고레 미샬레 안에 지금 강아마 오테 동아마 분녀에 대가지 통고로 와다 제가 되네기 동아뇨야 되게 유단 찐매 발라 되는 중요 말에서 유단 찐래 되는 용고래 제르마 지난 조아 저게 낭 삼리통 땅낭 요도네 마리비 유도네 아니 디바디 녀모 가사 강아디 리고래 제르 난 도시네 삼당 고래서 대간에스 대강아디 간에서 용고래 세디 지난 도시네 삼당라 삼당이데 삼나라야 셰리아 대차다 공로다 셰리아 체외 삼바 네베 삼바 디니께 베나 디 긴기 베나르스 nga jugeda raba nga ju nyamyo de duyo so konro chikeba de konro chemo chikeba ina konro keba de so ranya makiba cha na ndi genje phane konro sa midile ne makiba soya da konro de shukche che ro de lyunga ge jebe thone xianle chewa chen xianle xianyu so che pa da so pa da o de ne ge chen ne xianyu so che xianle ya ga ma mo dunga nya ya ane di genje ne so ranga ne ane jige nyeba 정강나 좋아하다 nyeba kugo야 되니까 강한 뭐가 되가 주디 두신에 삼른 마디다나 마디베트는 용고래서 두신 제사 되자 콘로 ngaja 뭐 마리파 됐어 델레트는 용고도 와서 삼는다 근데 되네 삼다는 디 이견이 당한 주기 되네 디과세 디사 디기 제보디 뭐 바나 개와 치말이네 동안용어야다 강한용어 용고래서 제사 되네 자다 저기 체델이네 랑기 통하기 미다 준도다 되네 강아요바디 통 안디 금제 안 규단 디바사베 제보디네 개와 치마 내가 손게도 아니 저게 냐와다 이다라 소바 동아디네 바토베 용고로 와 선배게 도시네 삼다당 모데네시 동아 요르와 제산 디파 다딜레데 타고 우두세다 데네 통요도 강아데 데네 통요도 강아데 미디어바자 공 강아레 델레데 타고도 마다데 탑 메뉴 선배게 타르도게 삼바치 기오레스 다 데네게 타도게 삼바치 요도 델안 타고는 델레 타야게 탑람디 탑시 뉴베드 술요레 수익업 투구레 델이야 수익업 투구레 랍도 다 점점 건조 섬나 상이 건조다 최 건조 이제 기둥 거지 팝에 정신선바 팝에 가서 대수기 두고 컨트롤 교비긴 니바 요래 해서지. 당한 저기 두시나 삼당 두시 삼당고 레저와 대지 교비 니바 요래. 진짜 니바 예다디다. 나저 이든마 레레 슈바나신 아니 그런 저기 곰냠len지 안잠니죠 곰 아니 지 파신 중에 냠len지 산지 그런 탈침비게 레사나 안저지선바디게 대단 냠수디네 연대 냠수 렌신바레 디네 자고라슬이야 캠비 연대 뉴베 연대 제외 연대 차상 요래스 컨트롤 요래스 베게다 두시네 당뭐 삼다나 림발마서 니도와 당한 저기 동아 체디가 저기 동아 랑한다 랑을 강하여다 랑이세 미당 심제 눈으로 강하여다 바삼다 니 금전도 지난다 규사반다 겨워치마 야와다 만솔레 지기다라서밖에나 누가되네 여러와 선배삼다 디 당보대체 디 니바데 삼다다 디 델레데 타고도 마다는 탑민우 세베 다제 랑야 타고도 랑레셰 심전 탐제콜 되네게 누가델레 타고도 마다는 탑민우 다데 타야게 교비 뉴바데 술 요래서도 다 잡내 건졌으면 요래 세베기다 가서 여바데 통화지 삼다다지 언도치네 삼다다 니 당보지 송거로 와다
So here at the conclusion of the 52nd verse, we've concluded the second of the four opponent powers, the power of reliance, the power of the basis. So this is where one purifies past non-virtuous karmic imprints that abide on our continuum through going for refuge to the three jewels, the Buddha jewel, the Dharma jewel, and the Sangha jewel. And in these last four verses, illustrations of the Sangha jewel, which in the context of the unique Mahayana refuge refers specifically to Arya Bodhisattvas. Then illustrations were given, Samantabhadra, Manjushri, Chenrezig, and now more in this verse as well. So in brief, all of the 8 close bodhisattvas were given explicitly or implied as illustrations of the Sangha jewel. Now all of us in this life, we have already experienced both directly and observed a wide array of problems, suffering and difficulties. Perhaps right now, or certainly at times in our lives, our suffering appears to overwhelm us, rain down upon us. And we've also will know people who have gone through periods of their life where things are really hard. And also when we observe realms beyond the human realm, as well as what we observe amongst humans in people who live very different lives from what we currently live here, we saw this wide variety of suffering. And all of the suffering that is experienced comes about independence on causes. It is not causeless. It doesn't just happen, but it has come about independence on causes. And those causes are non-virtuous karma and afflictions. Those are the two causes. This we need to reflect on and recognize that independence, in particular on afflictions, such as anger, attachment, malice, competitiveness, jealousy, and so forth, when these arise in our mind, their mere arisal destroys any peace of mind, any happiness we may have been experienced. And then if those afflictions not only dominate our mind, but we act under their influence, we express them through our way of speaking or way of acting, we harm others and we accumulate even stronger non-virtuous karma. So in this way, through the independence on the arisal of the afflictions, we suffer and accumulate non-virtue. And if we express those afflictions, acting under their influence, we harm others and therefore create even stronger non-virtue. And we may even experience direct suffering from that in this life, such as conflict with others, rejection from our family or our community, perhaps even imprisonment. So this we need to reflect on again and again, coming to recognize how we suffer both here in this life as well as in future lives independence on causes, and those causes are our negative karma and our afflictions. We need to reflect on this in terms of our own lived experience, and by our own lived experience, this is what we ourselves have directly experienced, as what we ourselves observe in terms of the experience of others, both humans and animals. As well as, then thirdly, when we, independence on what's presented in the texts, we reflect on the suffering in the realms of unseen beings. In every instance, we need to train ourselves that when we experience suffering or we observe suffering, to immediately remind ourselves, this has come about independence on causes. It's not causeless. And those causes are negative karma and afflictions. And the purpose of reminding ourselves of this again and again is by recognizing something is caused, something unwanted is caused, leads to the growing determination to gain liberation from those causes, to no longer accumulate those causes, and to gain liberation from their ripening effect. So when we recognize that the suffering of ourselves and others has come about in dependence on karma we've created and our afflictions, we then develop a determination to gain freedom from that. And who has the capacity to provide us with protection? There we turn to the three jewels, the Buddha jewel, the Dharma jewel, and the Sangha jewel. And specifically then in our context here, these 8 close bodhisattvas. And going for refuge to them with the wish to seek protection from suffering means seeking their guidance and developing, cultivating that guidance within us. In other words, receiving teachings and cultivating those teachings within our own mind, because this is the way to attain, to gain protection. For our refuge to be genuine, there are several aspects which need to be sincerely cultivated within. The one is the recognition of the suffering that ourselves and others are experiencing because of causes. This gives rise to that first cause of refuge, that of fear. Fear for the ongoing suffering of ourselves and others because of the karma that we have created and are continuously creating because of the dominance of our afflictions. And the second cause of a deep and sincere trust in the qualities of the three jewels. These two then require repeated reflection. Their qualities of having perfected love and compassion, their exalted wisdom, as well as their enlightened activities, as well as other qualities such as generosity, ethics, patience, joyous perseverance, and concentration. Because of these perfected qualities, we have confidence that their guidance, through us receiving it and cultivating it perfectly in accordance with how we are being trained, that is how we will gain protection from suffering in this and future lives. So there are these two key points here, that independent on meditating on suffering and its causes, we generate a fear for this ongoing cycle of samsara in which we are bound, and a deep and sincere trust or faith in the qualities of the three jewels. And these we bring together in our refuge, and under the influence of this mind of refuge, seek out their teachings and cultivate them within.
Dele Cuban, you give me some yore, some dance of Jelia, and Rana, Shen, some Tam, Dunga, Tadale, Jemio Consul, Guguri, Sembita, Jemio Consul, Guguri, Sembe, Jemio Consumla, the Guguris of Yiche, and Kale, Damja, Della, and some daddy, Jedida, Gamrosi or Dish over the Gamrosia Chagrua.
So there are the two causes for refuge: fear for this ongoing suffering in samsara, and faith that the three jewels, faith or trust in that the three jewels can protect us from suffering. And also one can include there the situation of others, that through our going for refuge and our spiritual development that will follow through developing the teachings within, we can help others too who are suffering in the same way.
Anda denege japsu chi se de nganzu kisin datu shue di datu chi la japsu chi se japsu chwa di che chesa da japsu do ko ne diba sha ba inza ane gar che war sen dir na la japsu chwa ne ane gar yo se chesa de yi nganzu ge ngan so da nya wa da che de la denege dunga nyo yu di diba nyo mo ba de sha khong rang la so ba ge bi nyo mo ba wang ge de wang ge diba sa ge do chesa di no chu chung do a se be di nyama di ne che yo ba ne no chu re sha se be ge di mindu se be ge da gyo ba ro che di mindu sam da chi ro di gyo ba ge ba si ro di mindu sam da chi da je ma o ba ne di ji me se be ge dam ja se di da ni bo to ni ba di ka se ni ba la mi do be to se che ro wa je dam ja chesa da de ji ngan zu kon chu som la japsu joye ge kon chu som bo di din yi top cha ro wa dene za da当然，今年在地修了，可是就像今年这门的忙把那这个面，今年在地里也关注什么呀？地里个年嘛，我说就比你把这边关注有了一切开联别团呢，那地立着了，立着忙把那地方这些下根上边个什么大的这个这边当然宁波的，那关注什么接触主要关的地方下个都送来的个事情嘛，当然宁波地里的。
This then is the way to go for refuge. And how does refuge serve to purify? Because this is the context that we are in. This is the second chapter, the chapter on confession. One goes for refuge, not as a mere recitation at the start of a meditation, but one goes for refuge because of understanding that the cause of all suffering that beings have ever experienced and ever will, as well as rebirth in the low realms, is negative karma and unvirtuous karma. Recognizing this then, one understands that in this and past lives, one oneself has accumulated tremendous non-virtue and thereby generates regret for past misdeeds. And with the recognition of the past misdeeds that we have accumulated under the power of the afflictions, and that this is what will result in suffering, we then promise to refrain from coming under the influence of the afflictions, from accumulating further non-virtue. So in this way, independence on refuge, one's regret strengthens, and one then also, which is an additional opponent power, and then a third opponent power is that of the promise or the commitment to refrain from further misdeeds. So this is how a refuge, when a refuge arises sincerely, serves to purify past misdeeds.
디 콘도 슈치면서 류하게 쥐어 두지야 레제 샹야 강아 제야다 데니 용고바디 만저 세보하고 그러와 제사다 상제다 상제게 남된 가른 된바래 람나 샹야 뉴스지에게 삼모도 균에 당교 말에서 제사샹라 뉴스지교 말에서 뉴스지에디 류하게 쥐비 돈에 샹라 뉴스지교 말에 디 제디 가르종하스는 군롱 샹라 뉴베 삼바 채와집에 삼로 주에나 디기 삼로에나 디 견제 류하게 쥐어바디 샹라 채와집에 용고레스 세상 류하게 쥐어바게 채와제 가야라 나 삼로나야디 류하 샹라 채와제기 제디게 삼로디 가가고레스 세상 샹라 류하 유스미 샹라 뉴베 자와 싸워있는 지금에 삼바디 삼당고레스 세상 디 송고레스 지금에 삼베 삼당고레스 신제나디니 자다 디 도쇼리아 하는 그 현래 네바 지금에 선배 삼다야다 현래 팬배자와 강도도 주투기 주바 지긴 새벽에 어두신의 삼당고레스 제대 안주게다 디송아인자 당한주게 랍자라 잡수드나 랍자라 랍긴시도 다 현래 상이 디송아들이야 안디송아디 라렌타기 냠len 지긴 새데 소수게 스케일인제네 되네 소소랑게 lu samnal kidine shelya lunga yusun yuka shela nyebe da chewe chawa sawa yin de chingme a sembe samdaya da ningi shelya pembe chawa kang tu du jugi sembe ge samdaya de dushine a de samdaya de da la jesu nyembe top chago ra nyembo
And as we're looking at the opponent power of the basis, or reliance, in other words, going for refuge, we can mention the summarized precepts of refuge. So firstly, one has already recognized that afflictions such as anger, pride, competitiveness, and jealousy, these afflicted minds, these minds that serve to afflict our mind in its entirety, cause us to suffer by their mere arisal, and if we express them, we cause others to suffer. Moreover, because of the negative karmic imprints created, we will suffer in future lives as well. So here in the first, we call to mind, with this understanding, we call to mind the first key precept of refuge, which is do not harm others. And the way do not harm is usually understood in this context is do not harm others through one's physical behavior and through one's way of speaking. And this is how we train as beginners, to restrain our body and restrain our speech. But when we act in a way, physically or verbally, that brings harm to others, it comes about solely due to a mind that is afflicted. For example, if the mind is angry, this is when we engage in physical violence or violent speech. So therefore, the more skilled practitioner, already having restrained their speech and their physical behavior to some degree, focuses on restraining their mind, taking responsibility for their own mind, and developing control over their own mind. So this then is the first precept of refuge. Do not harm others. And again, the subtler, the deeper way to understand it is to control one's mind, so one doesn't have thoughts of harm towards others, or thoughts that can lead to harm towards others. The second precept follows from the first. The first, the commitment not to bring harm, is followed by the commitment instead, wherever I can, and in accordance with my capacity, I will benefit others. When minds of harm towards others, whether they are pride or jealousy or competitiveness or attachment or anger arise, I will dispel them and rather generate loving minds, minds of wisdom, minds of compassion, and act under the influence of such minds. So this then is the second precept of refuge, which follows from the first. The first is a commitment not to harm, and the second is in accordance with my capacity to benefit others as much as I can. So these then are the trainings or commitments or precepts of refuge in a summarized form.
Ngonji kike kale de danen jiba chetone kela gyapso chilagi jiba nyudo salos.
That then concludes the section on the opponent power of reliance, which followed the opponent power of regret. And now we come to the opponent power of the antidote. And this then is whatever wholesome mind one trains in. So the 53rd verse, I previously transgressed your advice, but now as I have to face this fear, I turn to you for protecting refuge. Due to this, please quickly eliminate all dangers.
Na zuke ya samdang ta di ma dushine zuke samdang jebache samdang ure se samdang da sungoro da ngonji kike kale de se de da ngonji kike kale de se ne da direne ya soso jibene direne ya nyema ya jibene longama jawangama dene ge se chiro da rang da she chasangi de 원지 기에 갈레디에스네 원치에서다 디리니 야체리아 냐말이야 안에 기에 갈레디에스는 기에서다 점바상이 좀 내네 상얘기 안에 가르송말에서는 안에 상계다 디 안에 진주 전시서 파바디에 가르송말에서는 가르솔이야 안에 시한리아 체와다 뇌비게 체와 지교 말에 디버지교 말에서 되자 공조 나게디게 기지교 말에 제가 되시송 지사 디네송 디에 도초래 안에야 가르쳐고서는 아주 룡아이 순예죄되면 예죄 넘야다 주름송야 안세버고야 전주좀야 안지게 네 디네기 냠는 제고래세데 송샤여로다 지사 먼저 규기 가세가세의 결혼에 갈롭되는 소나요래사제 다깔레 디에세되다 디네기에 결혼의 송샤바디 다다 마제바체 안디 도쇼들이야 결혼계 현리야 채와지교 뇌바지교 말에 공조기 계시현리야 채와 뇌바지교 말에 세디 디기 도쇼의 현리야 뇌바몽 지요래 지르보다 소수게다 디바지요래 현리야 공로라 디바지야 뇌바지요래스 안다라나 현대게 되니기 중요해서 제산 결혼계 깔레 가당 개빌려가 망부지요스 결혼계 담 현리야 채와방 현리야 네 잠바다 제와다 니지요곰 아니 지게 두시네 곰세야디 니디 두시요 말레스 마제바제 안 두시네 데스네 두시 망부디네 바도 조바레서 두시 냐마디게 드네 두시 조소마레서 갈레 데세디 데바스네 조바라기로와 제사다 데사와레서 갈레 데라기로와 문제 기게 갈레 데 대세도 줘봐세요. 뒤서 줘봐. 뒤서 대서 와다 근데 나도 봐도 롱아마 다니말 경한 조사로 와다. 제가 대서 간에 줘버렸으네. 결혼게 까나셔기 까디기 람든 제제바딩 아주 디바 맞에서야 돼. 많이 맞에 디바제어레스. 디바 먹버제바레스. 결혼게 아니 샬이야 잠바다 제와 니지월 이공 아니 지게 두신의 람든 제제바디 두신의 냠는 따다 맞에바체 하모고와 녀모 마제바제 되는 뉴스티기 조서 말해서 다들 뉴스티는 조 말해서 안디시 제일 시유를 다 된지니래 먼저 기계 깔래 돼야 돼.
So here too, as with all the trainings of Buddhism, the focus is on the mind. The meaning of Buddhist practice, of Buddhist training, is to train one's mind to gain habituation to wholesome ways of thinking and break one's habituation to unwholesome ways of thinking. So looking at the first line, I previously transgressed your advice. Previously then refers to the period previous to right now. So through the entire period of this life up to this point, as well as lives previous to this, I have transgressed your advice. So the advice that has been transgressed, or the advice or the teachings, and the Tibetan uses an honorific word, so it's very clear, it's teachings from the Buddha, where the teachings of the Buddha have been to cultivate minds such as ethics, generosity, patience, joy's perseverance, concentration, wisdom, love, compassion, and so forth. Cultivate all of these within, and do not come under the control of the afflictions. Do not let your mind be afflicted or disturbed by the emotions of anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, and so forth. That is the advice. But this has been transgressed. Literally the word is, one has gone beyond. So in other words, one has engaged in the opposite. One is largely engaged in the opposite of what the teachings of the Buddha are. Instead of cultivating a sincerely generous attitude of giving of oneself, one is miserly, has been all too often miserly. Instead of restraining one's mind ethically, one's mind has been wild and untamed. Instead of being patient, one has been easily enraged and self-centered, and so forth. So instead of acting in accordance with the teachings of the Buddha, one has all too often transgressed them. That's all.
Anche le idee se di tenere calum nasce per di nyamle mace per di se zo savare se ro anche le idee se de an de va de se di su zo ba le ya cha ro anche le idee lamna bene sansam jil ba de zo chu ma re san ka she ba de na de ba zo man de le ba jin ro ne de le sansam de le de ne zo se ro sansam de ne zo la ro se sa de sansam de le jin ro na de ne ga ga yo shi ro 지난다 상기이 안능하죠 남되 안지기 디바지교 말에 에세지 디바지교 말에 안샹리아 차와도 녀바지교 말에 에세지 녀모바 컨트롤라서 바기지교 말에 에세지 디송바데 데니기 송바데레 파 대바는 산삼파긴 로니 대바로와 다지 제산디 대바세도 고든직 김제직 시월에 다다 가르치고라서나 상이 가르송바르스네 파산산 마소나 샹레 류가 유스미고네 샹레 녀바단 체외 삼로데 당교 말에 세송 요르바다 제가 상이 디체와 체외 삼로 당교 샹레 녀바체야다 샹레 체와체야다 데니기 콘르게 디 삼로디게 당교 말에 디 당교 말에 세 송와디 아니 딜레 데신다 가르죠 산삼 딜레 데신 가지고 콘르기로 와지 가딜레 가와로와 가네 상지 가가나 없으면 디과치교 말에스 샹레녀 받은 차와 디과치교 말에스 대단한 샹레야 잠바다 제와 공고래서 송바디 가디다 가지는 안주게 가지었으네 소수기 디과치 샹레야 차와치 샹레녀 받치도 샹라 잠바다 제와도 용고 말아 지난 상지 이게 송베 가디다 가와 지고로 지난 깔레디 세호데 깔레디 봐서 두치네 대신 잡아제 용고래 갈레디 센시가 담보디게 된다 시월에 대시 갈레디에서 된다 뒤수 먼저 두 냠내 약 맞아 뒤수 조사와레스네 뒤수를 자는 시로와 다들 뒤수를 맞아지야 갈레디에서 상이기 맞이에 세순세바디나 많이 제지나 상이 가당 가와로 시려가 제발에서 올다 상이 맞이에 세야디 제 장이 제쇼서야디 맞이에 받지 두셔야디 상이 갈레 대발에서도 갈레 가와레서 고고르다
With this recognition that one has, whilst not exclusively but largely, acted in a way that's contrary to the teachings of the Buddha. In other words, one has largely, although not exclusively, been dominated by the afflictions and thereby acted in ways that bring harm to oneself and to others. Here, now having recognized that, one draws a line in the sand, but maybe a bit stronger than that expression. One creates a solid boundary, a solid border, that I will restrain my body, my physical behavior, I will restrain my speech through taking care, responsibility for my mind. And I will, from now, no longer cause harm to myself or others.
내게 삼다도 안주기 지당 안줄이야 균기 차다 연대체 이게 되어로 와다 님 야고에 제열에 안에 되게 야고메바 제열로 와다 벤디바사 샹야 벤제와다 잠바 벤 수이네 소수가 부위네 소수 부고리 잠바 제와 지기로 소수가 원이올 잠바 제와 지기로 지난 제열에 탐제네 말와 되게 다 삼다나도는 두 삼다도 아주 균기 초대 삼다 지난 균기 초네 삼다에도 마음반의 균들이야 두신데 삼다 어디디 디미노스 녀망이 되네 제바디게 디미도 너를 중앙에 샤스베게다 교백의 용어로 디미노 삼바이나 되는 제말이가 되래 자와 주고 말와 제사디 지금 말와 녀망이 샹리아 콩르자 샹리아 차와다 녀바체 디미노 삼바이나 내 마음바다디 지금에 삼배 삼로 줄리기로와 제사도시는 균유 초네 삼다에도 디미노 삼배 삼다에도 어디든지 디미노 너를 중시아가 산지가 레데샤 산지게 잠니지 검세등에 맞아 마곰바체 디니 주지 몽부 철라 조샤 삼배 삼다에도 어디지 오도디 니세베테 곧 냠는 제 둠바데 돈이를 슉샬리아다 냠망 지금 누가로 제비나 어다 짜오이는 지금에 샘비게 덤섬기야 들리고 봐도 돈다 니돈다를 숨고래 지금 이 집에 두자를 소소라하게 소소라하래 마베다야 소소성 통중다에게 니섬 말에 그 교인 유천에 섬다도 소소길이야 근데 연된지 가르치고 그래서네 오다 친진 지금에 선배게 삼로 용거래 안 지금 얘디 이마 야부 지역가데 제민도 섬섬다 아니 단 제민도 세바 맞아봐 뛰는다 하고도 당의 지긴 선배 다 제대로 돈을 좀 숙제리 거래 제산디 인자 소소기 디 돈이 삼되게 돈이 좀 받아 아니 교인들 양게 지금에서 몇선로 개화로와 제산디 숙기 레투고르네 삼다야 제산디 삼당외디 두신의 레벤 삼당외는 두신의 계획이 삼로디 레투고르와 디던달 송고르와다 나도 소소 통중 다야다 소소 마베 아당아 빼 쪼르 샤선 비엔 빠심 거야 한디 삼다야 너를 차고래
Here I want to emphasize a point that can get lost when we're looking intensely, like we have been for some months, at this chapter on confession. Yes, we have a huge number of negative imprints on our continuum, and we do have faults in our personality in that we have these afflictions that we are so habituated to, but we also have a number of excellent qualities. This is the case for everyone. Everyone has faults and good qualities. So one must use one's wisdom throughout, because some people have the tendency to focus on faults. This is unbalanced and therefore will not lead to much success in one's practice. So if you recognize in yourself you have a tendency to beat up on yourself, to criticize yourself, recognize that, and recognize that that is something that's unbalanced, and therefore is hindering, is harming you yourself, and is hindering your spiritual development. So recognize that, and then remind yourself of the good qualities you do have, such as how you care for your children, you care for your friends, you care for your loved ones. Recognize that. What we are trying to do in this process of confession is recognize the faults that have been committed. In particular, the tendencies one has, the strong habitual tendencies, and trying to bring an end to them in order so that the wholesome qualities that one already has, that they can shine through more. Because if the mind, at any time, when the mind is dominated by the afflictions, one's good qualities are suppressed. So now by trying to recognize the faults and to counteract them, one gives more space to develop our wholesome qualities, those that we already have, to develop them further, and those positive traits that are still quite weak, to make them a little stronger. So we need, in this process, to look honestly at ourselves, and if we recognize we have this tendency to criticize ourselves, be aware not to do so in this practice, but to keep a balanced approach. And again, not to ignore one's faults, that too isn't balanced. So we need to be skillful here. And if we are skillful, our spiritual development will come about quickly.
Dine shirwadan benengazu pere kalaro shine, chi kala shimburo shiyobashe, ine adisabana choden liya shibu nugiyo bayna, chisan kala diliya, ni shimbu do supuli panya chiyo yotiken, nye niga yotiken shirwa. Tangan zuki kala diliya, nye bigi gyunde sammatangwa chiyo, kuyo yonden shimbu yobada sosili panya di shimbu yobada samtangwa di kala de masaya la gato kumara ki dina sasho ruwa, sasho nu supuli choden li nugo ruwa. Chisanta shimbu dan shimbu yore, panya jo yode ten, ina choden li nugi bigi gyundi sam sola yukchi, ode zisana nga la choden nugi re, ngan ji supuli kangan chegi re din, ji yakbo yo marasame, gyundi samtang shabena, kala di masaya kaya li ya, pe dumde ur chegdo wade, chego ruwa. Chisanta gyundi sammatang jo yonden di ko shimbu dan ko yonden samtang na, dini kala zayade kautom di jemado wache, ani 가tum지가 삼도 리고하면 디말레데 칼레데 사쇼라 산스 안주 쳐된래야 뇌고로 그래서 디네자 칼라디게야 균이게 초되래야 다 삼다샤데 디네고 칼라사 사되게 되냐기 tumbal이 말든 바 사제미알이야 dum데로 중고로 가데
So if we think of something that we enjoy eating, that we find quite delicious, but it's unhealthy, we can take that food type and we can say it has benefits in that we eat it, we become happy, and it has faults because it harms our body. So taking that food type, if we do not recognize that it has a fault, that there are faults to it, we will never stop eating it because we enjoy it. And we'll continue to eat it despite the harm that comes. Later, when we have more education and recognize that that food type actually causes us harm, but we'll still be enjoying it. We may then want to give it up, but we will, because we enjoy it, we'll continue to eat it despite the harm that comes. So what we have there is knowledge, but we haven't yet come to integrate that knowledge deep within. There's been no transformation brought about through integrating that knowledge. But when we do, when we reflect deeply on the great faults that come, as opposed to the small benefit, and reflect deeply enough so that a transformation to our way of thinking comes about, or a realization, then it's easy to turn away from that food. We'll still recognize it as delicious, but the benefit of its nice taste will now be far outweighed by the fault that we recognize. And then we'll be able to turn away from that delicious food with ease. So this is what we need to come to do in this process, through gathering knowledge and integrating it within. First, we gain knowledge, but that doesn't lead to a transformation of our way of thinking. But by repeatedly thinking using many reasons, we transform our way of thinking, and we can then naturally, with ease, turn away from harmful habit patterns.
Dane jiba che thone sida dane jiba che thone sida da nge ha go son se go da nge ha go son gara go re sene ba ji sa diba khon ro sa di chik de cha khon ro nga ye nyomo be wang ge nyomo di wang ge chi diba sa ba ina dene gi dibi de bo di ane je ge 강아 친구 용어 봐 체대를 이내야 안에 강아 용어 받아 안개와 치마 가서다 게면에 가서미 동화다 냐와다 이다라서 누누기 동화 집어 친구 동화 강아 친구 용어 받이 야하고 통성 사고 성서 그래 단내 집어 체도네 세대 제사 데니기 디비기 가지고 지게 냐와나 이다나 지게 둔도라서 받아 데니게 강아 밀리야 강아 용아디게 차상 당한 지게 디비 제볼 때는 용어 받 유다게 셈 삼로타다 뇨몬베게 삼로타다 니토네 용구여바데 냐하고 소스 다니 지바스다 강아디게 용구여바데 강아 침보 용구여바 딩이 가rel레데네 용구여바세네 디바사 레다 뇨모바디 원기 중구여바데 냐하고서 통소 체도네스네 딘 디바 침보데 용구 지바 침보 용구여바데 가나가나 용구여바 지바 침보 가라가라 요래 디기 지바 침보디게 냐와다 이다 둔도 하나가지 둔도 밀이야 되는게 집어 간데 강아가지 용구여 봐대 하고 손스 제수 유가를 때는 용구여 봐세데 녀모바 원게 용구여 봐 디야 하고 손스 단에 집어 체통네스 이뜻은 하고 손스 월당아 주다 두신의 산지 강아주게 라미세네 최슈네 소속의 삼나땅 김전 삼당에도 오 다디니기 저기 두신듯이 셰바나시 Jinganzu Milia Ganga Karakara Yungudu, that's some Dana Tony, Madibi Kini Karakara Yungudu, do Shimji Jedu, then some Dana to the Madibi Tony, and the Milia Ganga Mambu Yungu Batting as a Hago to Bore, Digi Genjin, the Diva side, Digi, Mangubana, Nyawad, and Nansonda, and the Nevi Dungadi, bottom of Yungo Body, do Sinigum, sometimes to Hago to Bore, the next sometimes, just I didn't sometimes, then get Hago on Sigurda.
The second line, but now as I have to face this fear. So, but now refers to that now that I know this. And what is it that one now knows? What is this fear that one is now having to face? Well, one has come to recognize the dangers or the fears that our own afflictions and the resulting suffering and karma produces, both in this life and in future lives. This is what we now come to know. And therefore one has developed fear for the suffering that awaits us in this life as a human being, as well as in potential rebirth in the lower realms. So through the teachings that we have received, I've now come to know that the existence of realms of unseen beings and how they suffer there, as well as a deeper understanding of the suffering of animals and certainly the suffering of humans too. And that all of these sufferings come about in dependence on causes that beings themselves create, that negative karma created under the power of the afflictions. I've heard teachings on this, I've reflected on those teachings, and now I come to know this, or I have to face this fear.
Dani jiba chedones, dadi jablo shula karyunguresene, chizada, Shanlia Tsewe Sambapon, Tsurim Song, Dene Shanlia Jambatan Zawakom, Jimbatan Tsurim Subegi, Yamlenche, Dingetina Dame Balasoba, Tobe Sherakom, Yamlen Chevaina, Kowe Dungale, Tadale, Dreshe, Tabata Tamji Kimbo, go on to Yobadia, Nihahoson, Chagorwada.
Furthermore, I also know that this situation that I find myself in can be remedied through engaging in the cultivation of a truly generous outlook, of a mind that is ethical and restrained from the afflictions, based on love and compassion, engaging with a patient outlook, striving with joy and persevering in the cultivation of virtue, developing a powerful, concentrated mind, and in particular, the wisdom of selflessness. This is the method to gain liberation from the sufferings of samsara in its entirety. This too I've come to know.
Tsewe Samba never DB Jawa Nyomomba, Fakia, Gaj Nyomomba Diki, Kasa DB Jawa Sawagin Chigi Me, Majevazada, Kasore, Tabata, Tamji Kibio, Koale, Drag, Tab Nyamling Rimbadi, Pagang to do Chigi said, Kala, Japso, Chilagi, and the name Yamlin Jabala, Dene, Koale, Tugur, Denza, Denigi, Denigi Lamdun, Chik, Naji, Yakim Consumgi, Duchene. Lamden na shaba tele nyamso lemba le tenengi kowe dunga tadale jiba kowe dunga jiba tele pa nyurdu tartuba jigis and denege ane denege tartuba jebala ane gonjo sumgi ya ane ji gasore jinlap ji nara she sa sugura salo so se ma ngi tiba digi pa kowa je nyama tiba sa sha gyo digi chasan pa sero je sa salo so se.
Knowing this, then the third and fourth lines, I turn to you for protecting refuge. Due to this, please quickly eliminate all dangers. So knowing this, both the causes of suffering and what potentially awaits us, as well as knowing the solution to the situation, the cultivation of virtue, one turns to the three jewels, and to them one makes a promise to refrain from coming under the influence of the afflictions, and thereby one is also promising to refrain from accumulating further non-virtue. And accompanying this promise is the promise to strive in the cultivation of virtuous minds, such as ethics, generosity, and so forth, and striving to cultivate them precisely in accordance with how one has been trained. In this final line, to do this, please quickly eliminate all dangers. So here one is requesting blessings or inspiration so that one can be successful in one's endeavors to turn away from non-virtue and to strive in cultivating wholesome ways of thinking.
Dana nyingbo di kare sungor se na dang ang zule sam dang tha du sin ne sam dang tha de le go ro da ne du sin ne sam dang go re sa de ji sa ding ang zule sam dang ji sa sam kar dang go se na ang zule ji ge dung a ya ya de ge ne yu ga de de yong gu yo ba dang kan de sung du sin ne sam da an da dung a ji me ba de de gi ya de sam lo kan sta ba de yong go re se pe du sin ne je ba je sam dang de ji sa de ja khong rang a ja la so ba ji de ji su la de ne 만주 류가위 줘방 안 받을래 류가위 줘방에 배터네 샬리아 뇌바다 채와 제바 지레도 라나 셴니가라 강아 용고래 세지 두신의 제바 제고래 세 삼다나시 안디 두신의 삼다베는 아주기 지게 라와라와 삼다나 세부로와 소수요 콘로사나 아니 소소 마기바제 콘로 슈치르드 아니 칸네 츠sub샤다 아니 지 류기 라바 파 양샬리아 뇌바제다 용고로와 안디 충산의 삼다베는 되는 안주게 조바당 거원예바의 미사지네 마찬바 미준바차데 강아디 라시니가 강아요 모르와 나델에 또 샤와 삼다베는 지본부지 관내 왕시 유견지리아 시안리아 지게 소수기 지게 개합다 진의 샹달리아 차와다 뇌베 삼바지 개여도 니기 휴견제네 마샹리아 안디 제고래 제고서 왕시 배제다 되듯이 안지 지샹리아 디네 마야다 도르심제다 배 강아 다딩아도 통나 통시스기 봐라 대주차사 삼루 통네 샹리아 뇌바는 체외 삼바 여바의 디 군롱기 휴견이 통네 디 샹리아 강아제야의 용거로 봐 샹리아 잠바단 제와 삼루여나 류가위 주비샹리아 체와의 제외 자발리가 말아 말레베나 강아지 용 말아 지산 두 삼다베는 저기 삼루 다당게 통네 샹리아 체외된 뇌베 삼바 여바이나 니 이견체네 충자이나 충중이나 랑기 미사당 저 분야 조고나설 미된바차야 딜레 체와 삼다는 예가 편준 마주 친구 쉬어야 돼 삼롱 전례 체외 삼바 뇌베 삼바 디기 견제네 용구여바디 세부하고 두부도와 아다 두시에 삼다 니네게 삼다에도다 다냐와당 소세 냐와세 디딩한 주기 통거 말데 이내다 니네게 요로와당 주변에 샘쟁 안 주기 년마 윤회 하모올이야 대산 심주지 지제연의 가서나를 옆에 샘진 지금 미려 싸워싸워 멍분이에요와 강아 되게 통하여 어디나 신당한 쪽에 다된 아주 통하게 뉴버디오 말데 멍바나 야지 아주 튕겐다 튕이 통하게 뉴버 셔도 아니냐와 다 이다되게 통토바 용시로와 진행자 저게 되는게 다 대술이야 강아 두수 체결해서 두진의 심주시도 근데 삼당제 다 현在뇌베다 자와나 체외 자와 지금에 선배 삼당와야지 또 삼당아 지시거라 당안촌 다 도초네 딜레 도초 삼당도 다 상계단 전주 선배사데 배 현在판박견야 줍두시지 다지 네 그런저게 현在잠바다 제와고 되네게 안에 코와라 타도게 뇌중에 삼바고 디곰발에 되네 안에지 그런저게 지금 류 나사메 셈레 둥아메 바게디나 디기용 게디나 샹리아 판바장야 줍디게 상계다 전시 선바디 연데 디기 용야디 가르치는 용바래라나 안에 어때지 류가 예수님 주디베 추름송 안에 지게 잠니제곰 되네 안에 안제 지진바도 추름라 쇠바도 준저라 소바 안 다음에 바도 베셔라 곰발레 되네 컨스티튜션 아레스 제사 되네자 디 유 잠니지의 콘소 콤바나시 냠는 제바데 녜디야 냠는 지기 선배기 두신의 삼당 우레스로 당 삼당제 당나 두신사 제바제 삼당의 두시오레스.
Summarized in what we've looked at here in this verse is that we need to train our mind train our mind through reflecting on the causes of suffering and reflecting on the causes of happiness to ensure that when we either observe or experience suffering or happiness, that we recognize that it's cause and it doesn't just befall one. And moreover, we need to engage in these and all reflections to the point where we really come to recognize it for ourselves, so that it has a transformative impact on our very being. We need to come to recognize that the afflictions always lead to suffering. Their mere arisal causes us to suffer. When we express them, we cause others to suffer. And with all these meditations, we start out at a very coarse level, because that's easy to recognize. And as we gain familiarity with that, we'll naturally look deeper within. So we can recognize easily that when anger arises, we are unhappy. We can be sitting on our own, we can be somewhere very beautiful, but if anger arises, our inner peace is lost. And if we express that unhappiness, that anger to others, they immediately suffer. They may even then also respond to us in a similar manner. And if we do so often enough to the same people, our relationships with them will be harmed. We need to reflect that all conflict of any type comes about in dependence on these afflictions. Not just conflict, but when people take advantage of others or people take advantage of oneself. Afflictions are always leading to such behavior. When our minds are dominated by genuine love and compassion, our mind is at ease, at peace, and we will not bring harm to others. We will not act in a way that causes the suffering to others either. But when our afflictions are dominant, we will cause harm within our families, and all conflict between communities or nations comes from the afflictions of those with authority and power. And in these reflections, it's important also to reflect on your own lived experience and what you observe in the world and have observed in the world. And also reflect on the animal realm as well as those unseen beings. And if one is struggling to accept that there are spirits and hell beings, then bear in mind that many types of animal have been discovered in recent years, decades, and centuries. Through the development of technology, travel allowed the discovery of many species, as well as the observation of species that otherwise could be unseen to humans, either because they were too small or too deep in the ocean. So in the same way, eventually humans will develop technology that will allow them to observe beings whose forms are not coarse matter, and thereby will come to see beings who now currently are unknown to humans. And through merely that logic, one can at least be open to the possibility that there are forms of existence beyond what we have observed in this life. So reflect on suffering that is experienced across all realms. And then, when one reflects on suffering and its causes, naturally one will want freedom from such suffering, and that will encourage one's refuge or deepen one's refuge and make one's refuge more sincere. And what one is trying to get to with this mind of refuge is seeing that the Buddhas and the great Bodhisattvas, to see them as role models, as beings who are once ordinary like us, who were once sitting, struggling with the same meditations, but through persevering, arose eventually, or developed themselves eventually into these great beings. Holding them up then, through our refuge, is holding them up as our role models, with a commitment to emulate them, to emulate them through training in the same way that they train, developing in particular love, compassion, and wisdom within. Because to the extent that we develop genuine love, compassion, and wisdom, we will hold all others as dear. Their welfare, their happiness, will be something that matters to us. Not just those of our loved ones, but all. Their happiness will matter to us. And this will strengthen our resolve to cultivate wholesome minds and to have them dominant within us at all times, enabling us to act with a truly ethical mind, a generous heart, a patient outlook, love, and compassion. And moreover, to also train in the wisdom realizing selflessness and to have that understanding within us, both on the meditation cushion and when we're engaging with others. So this, in brief, is the essence of what we've looked at here.
Andine zanga juge dushine samnta susu nyama diwa dibara to jimati varchana odi di minus no chunsha sambege samta an susu ge dushine ji yagura je shan le pembe jawa dan susu ge jo ru tu de dige ha yena oda di yagu chunsha sambe de le chi su irana de yagu chunsha mo banangi di na shin je tu ba ji kin sambege samda de ge wala chi su irana je de ge chimore 아니 디네 자당은 섬나려야 현래 뇌배단 체외 잡아서 자와는 지금에 선배 삼모대 야내 야도 당고야 돼 예심을 직제 아니 니바들라 당은 주게 현야 현심자들 제 대화도 대나 삼바다 동화단 저와쇼 선배 삼다야 아니 현심자리야 판별시 주기 선배게 지 주기 선배 삼다야다 디네게 삼다야 된 아주 삼는데 야내 야도 당고야 돼 두신내가 삼을 검시수고로 두신 삼다야 예심을 와 dan zo di sung go wa de ne za da ngan zo gabriel ya da ji kon ro sa me milia ji je cewa ji me sam ba ne ji gabriel ya de ne ko kon ro sa de ne yong gu ro wa da ine da ngan zo yong de gabriel ngan zo ga a da ni di sam da na 판도 시라면 되든 kon gi yong gu du mi shan ya ne wa je de yong du sim pe ke sam da we ne da 어다 판도 민도 sam ba ne ya ji pa sha sha ya gi 바 잠야 영아치 뭐 여러 가지서 디네자 디네 연구로가도 공부하다도 검시 전부 매라도 검시도 저기서 공부시는 검시도 바슈 철철도 콘르자야 되게 용용용용 좋아차야로 맞아 남사 생매 삼바 남사 콘르 가도야스카야 말로 가서는 아주 검시 전부로 디제자 곧 지금에 삼바에는 일 직가블레 되게 제 콘르사야는 현재 채와 삼바지 중외네 야게는 마음바다 디징메 선배 삼다지 무티장아서 다 삼다지 바 직전주 좀 전에 난 디징메다 디린데는 쇼데이네 마음바다 지징메 선배다 자위 지징메 선배 삼다데 당 두신의 삼문나래 야네 야도 삼다데 검시서야 되게 좀 책이도 와 당한줄이야 연례 편바다 제 제외 삼바다 하는 지게 야는 상계고고 탈바다 탐제기묘고 토고도 선배 삼로디 간주 검시셔라요 말와 제산디네 인자 디 검시 숙시해서야 다 당아주 현래 뇌바도 코로나 남사 뛰어서 말은 코로나 쳐줘 남상 요제데 냐만도 코로나 막 몰라는 검시 첨보여 와 디기 남상 코로나 기초 자도 거로 디네 사당아 저기 디네기 검시서야 돼 검거 삼다지 김전 삼다 디네 삼다 야네 야도 삼다야 돼 나디 예지 모르 자기서라다
So to conclude here, in our meditations, it's essential that we generate regret for past non-virtues, because many we would have engaged in at the time without even thinking anything of it, perhaps even thinking that this was a correct way to act. But now that we have greater knowledge, generate regret for past non-virtue, but also rejoice in your wholesome qualities and rejoice in the same ones again and again. This is important to ensure that one has a balanced view of oneself, recognizing both the good qualities that need to be developed and the faults that need to be abandoned. What also needs to be reflected on repeatedly is the commitment not to harm others, not to add to the burden of suffering of others, but instead, I'll only benefit others. When I engage with others, I'll do so in a manner that helps them, not harms them. So these steps we need to engage in repeatedly over a sustained period. And the final point to make is that if you've recognized the faults of the afflictions and have the wish to be freed of the afflictions, and even you may be trying in your meditation to abandon afflictions, be aware they will still arise. For example, you will still sometimes get angry. When this happens, how you respond is important. If one gets, for example, angry again, and you recognize this, then that is okay. Getting angry again, even though you're trying to abandon it, that is okay. Because this is part of the process. The first step is coming to gather the knowledge. Second step is trying to integrate it. And in this process, we'll be coming to know ourselves better, get to see our minds more. And instead of just acting in an unthinking way, we'll become ever more aware of how easily our afflictions arise. And when you see that same affliction arising again and again, that too is okay. Now one is just recognizing a strong habituation. And we all have habituations to the afflictions. Some are very strong, some are only mildly strong. And when one recognizes these, even if it's a single arising, or if one is recognizing habituation, the fact that it's being recognized, this is something to rejoice in. And then as one keeps trying in one's training that afflictions are harmful for these various reasons, rather I should act under these wholesome minds. And one in one's meditation role-plays situations. How can one respond more skillfully? Slowly, as long as one does this repeatedly over a sustained period, slowly, not only will you recognize the arisal of the afflictions, but there'll be a sizable space between the arisal of the affliction and your response. And in that space, now, having seen the affliction and knowing that it's faulty, you can rather apply a wholesome mind, a virtuous mind instead. And in this way, overcome the suffering mind and respond under the influence of a wholesome mind. And at every step, even when it's merely recognizing the arisal of the affliction, even if it's only much later, rejoice in that point. Keep rejoicing in your progress every day. Look for your progress. Review your progress. Rejoice in it. But this is an important step that's all too easily overlooked, because through recognizing progress, joyous perseverance will grow. We have deep-seated habituation to our afflictions. What we are trying to do is challenge that habituation through the cultivation of a wide variety of wholesome minds. To develop new habits and break old habits requires repeated, sustained endeavor. So again, if you see yourself making the same mistake, falling down once again, that is okay. It's just a sign of a strong habit. But have confidence that if you continue in this process of training your mind, all that you require is this repeated endeavor and time. And these strong habits too will be abandoned. Okay, thank you. Then we conclude there for tonight. Thank you very much.